What scary things are lurking in the deep, dark cave of your knitting bag or basket? Fiber Junkies, welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast. If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for joining us, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. In case you might not have figured it out from the intro, today I am going to show you the results of my recent spelunking into the deep, dark, scary recesses of my knitting basket. So I have a knitting bag that I take with me because I'm one of those people who gets fidgety at the idea of sitting still and having nothing to do with my hands. So sometimes I will take a book, but more often than not I will have a sock on the needles or a hat or some kind of small and portable knitting project that I take with me. And I've also been known to carry full sweaters and big, huge shawls and things with me as well, depending on where I'm going and how much space I have. So I've got a nice big backpack that I take with me almost everywhere that keeps at least 1 to 3 smallish projects or a larger project in it, plus my notions bag, my iPad. Sometimes I use that instead of a purse, depending on where I'm going. I really like that I can just put the backpack on and have my hands free. So that's kind of like my portable knitting on the go that I take around with me, and it typically houses the thing or things that I am most frequently working on. However, I also have a knitting basket in my living room, and then I've got works in progress, items that are like done and almost finished, but they need like buttons sewn on or like to be blocked or something. I'll often put those in the knitting basket. I keep my drop spindle and spinning fiber in there, and then like my extra stash of needles that I'm not currently using. I have like my needle case in there and stuff as well. So I keep a lot of things. This is also where I put bigger projects that I'm working on but I can only do at home. So sometimes when I'm working on Fair Isle sweaters, I get to a certain point where the body is just getting really huge and I've got like 15 skeins of yarn going at the same time. So I will put like Fair Isle and all of its little balls of yarn in my work basket. Or I will, if I'm working on a big blanket or something like that, I will put larger projects that aren't as portable and I don't like to take even around to other rooms in my house, but especially not out of my house. I tend to keep those larger projects in there. But like I said, it's also where things go when they need to be finished or when they're in timeout. So sometimes, you know, we all have those projects where we're working on something and then for whatever reason, either we run into a snag or we realize we're gonna have to pull out like 15 rows of intricate lace and we're just not emotionally up for the challenge in the moment. Or you realize that you need a needle or another skein of yarn that you don't have on hand and you got to go to the store and buy it, so you put it in timeout until you have time to work on it or until you're emotionally stable. As often happens when that occurs, sometimes I'll come back to the project within a few days or a week or two, but more often than not, if it goes into timeout, it'll sit there for several weeks to several months, and in some cases a couple years. If you've watched the podcast for a while, you know that I am not a monogamous knitter at all. In fact, I usually have multiple projects going on in addition to having some spinning fiber on my drop spindle usually, and lots of other little projects going as well. So I don't stick to just 1 or even 2 projects very frequently. It's very rare if that happens. So because of that, I tend to switch out my projects and rotate them out depending on what I'm in the mood for, where I'm going to be knitting, what's the most convenient, etc., etc. And recently I realized that my work basket or my knitting basket in my living room was starting to get really messy and really full. In a moment of stress and panic and feeling very determined to get my life a little more under control, I sat down and spent about an hour and a half going through each and everything in the knitting basket, and I was ruthless about it. I threw away, gave away, or ripped out and wound back into balls so many projects that were just destined to never get finished. A couple of them were ones that I hated so much I had to get rid of the yarn because we got into a fight when I was working on it, and it was never, we couldn't make up and move on. So it just needed to go be homed with somebody else because I was never going to have any good feelings towards that yarn or pattern again. So there were a couple of those items, but more often than not, they were just ripped out. And I wound the balls of yarn back up into skeins or balls and put them back into the stash to retry something else in the future. But there were 3 projects that were so good and or close that I decided that I want to try picking them back up again, but I think that one or two of them may have to be ripped back to the beginning and started over, but I think I'm actually going to start the project again and stick with the original pattern and choice of yarn. I just need to either figure out where I left off in the pattern or start it over. And then one of those is one of the projects that was almost done but just needs some finishing, and we all know I'm pretty bad about that. In fact, if you watched the podcast last week, you know that the Groots cardigan is what I'm wearing today, and I talked about how it was basically finished. I just needed to weave in a couple ends, block it lightly, and sew on buttons. And guess what? It still doesn't have buttons. And I thought I'd gotten all of the ends, but when I put it on this morning, I realized there's like a stray little end on the inside of the pocket, so I missed one. But yeah, I decided I was gonna wear it anyways because I was really chilly today. It's like super windy in Kansas City today, so I just wanted to put on a nice cozy little jacket. And because I'm working around the house today doing podcasting and dishes and super boring things like budgeting and finances and all that kind of fun, hashtag not fun, all that kind of fun adulting stuff. So I decided I would be really cozy, and I put on my new cardigan. This is the first time I've actually gotten to wear it, and I love it. It's super cozy. This was knit out of my bombshell worsted that is in my shop, and this colorway is currently out of stock, but it will be coming back in soon. It's called Opera Glasses, and it's one of the only neutrals besides gray that I ever dye, and it's my favorite, and I'm super proud of myself because I'm really bad at neutrals, and I'm really bad at soft, quiet, very light pastel-y shades, and it is both of those things, and it's fantastic. So I'm really, really happy with this. And then I'm also wearing my Orchids and Fairy Lights hat, which I've worn on the podcast a million times because it's my favorite hand knit hat. This was a Malabrigo Rios yarn, so it's a worsted weight. And it's actually a different colorway, but it's similar to the Opera Glasses. Theirs is just a little darker and a little more brown. But that's what I'm wearing today. But I wanted to show you guys. Obviously, buttons don't always happen, and I just wear them anyways, but I have another sweater that I need to put buttons on, and I need to block. So this was one of the things in the very, very, very bottom of the work basket. I'd forgotten that I even had this thing, and in fact, when I pulled it out, I recognized it when it was all bunched up in the bottom, and I thought, oh, I'm just gonna rip that out. And then I pulled it out and realized the entire thing is done, except for blocking and buttons, so I'm not gonna rip it out. This is the Audrey in Unst sweater. I will put a link to this below. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's a free pattern on Ravelry. If not, it's not very expensive, but I think it's free. But I knit this right about 3 years ago, because I actually knit this before I opened Potion Yarns, but right after I started dyeing yarn for the very first time. In fact, this was only like the second or third thing I ever dyed. So I dyed this yarn myself. I'll let you see it. This was an experiment. I actually did this in a crock pot, which is a great way if you're wanting to try dyeing for just as a hobby. Dyeing in a crock pot is a really easy, great way to get started. It's super simple. The only thing about it is you absolutely, 100%, absolutely do not cheat on this. You have to buy a separate crock pot that you will never again use for food, ever. One of my neighbors happened to post on our neighborhood page that she had an extra crock pot she was just gonna get rid of, and she said, does anyone want it? It still works, it's just really old, and we got a bigger one. And so I scooped it up for free, but I was going to go to the thrift store, and I know several people who got theirs at a thrift store. So just go into a thrift store or find one at a consignment shop, estate sale, garage sale, whatever, that still works, and you have like temperature control because you don't want to get it too high. But you absolutely can never, ever, 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 ever use that for food again. So these dyes are toxic if you eat them, and like a little teeny tiny bit probably wouldn't hurt you, but you just don't want to take chances. So I took a Sharpie and put a big X and said like, don't cook or something on the side of mine so that my husband wouldn't find it and accidentally use it. And I also keep it in a, or I kept it, I've gotten rid of it since then, but I kept it in a separate room from the kitchen. I didn't even want it in my kitchen so that nobody would accidentally confuse it. But it's a really great way to start out. And because I was just starting and I hadn't learned a whole lot yet, and I was kind of just making it up as I went along and going off my instincts, I ended up making this absolutely gorgeous peachy pink color, but I only did like one pot of color. I just mixed some dye solutions, poured it in the pot, turned it on to low. I submerged my skein that I'd already soaked in water and citric acid in there. And I think I did a couple skeins actually, and I just kind of made sure they were all submerged. stirred it around a little bit, and then I just left it for like an hour and came back and checked it. And once all of the dye had exhausted out of the water and the water was clear, I rinsed it and caked it up and knit with it. So it was only one pan of color, and if you know anything about my dyeing style now, you know that I don't do that anymore. I do multiple pans of color. Which is how I get my really dimensional skeins. But I still loved how pretty this came out. If you can see that, it has a lot of variation from light to dark. It's a really nice tonal colorway, and it's really, really pretty, kind of a salmony pinkish. It reminds me of like shrimp or pink flamingos or something like that. So I love this sweater because of the really deep welt at the bottom. It's got a knit one through the back loop purl one border to the cuffs and the button band and the bottom hem. And that is one of my favorite types of edgings because I love when you knit through the back loop and then purl the next one. I love the way those knit stitches really, really pop out at you. It's a very high relief, very, very textural looking rib, and it's absolutely stunning. And I love this super simple little lace that they did up at the top. I don't know if you can see that. It's really easy, it's not difficult at all, and it just creates this gorgeous, very, very vintagey, girly feeling little cardigan. It has 3/4 sleeves or cropped elbow length sleeves somewhere in there. I think mine come to just below my elbow, but it's got little cropped sleeves. It's a nice lightweight springy kind of cardigan. So I just need to block that and then pick out some buttons, and that one's done. And I'm so excited because I threw it in the basket long enough I completely forgot about it. And now it is March in Kansas City and we're getting close to springtime. We're having kind of a long winter this year, so it's still cozy sweater weather right now, but we're getting very close to springy days, and it's kind of been, the weather's been flirting with us a little lately, so I know warm days are just on the horizon, and so this is perfect timing for me to find this cute little springy cardigan, and so I'm really excited. I just need to make space and time to block that and get some buttons on soon. So that's the first thing I found. This next two projects are ones that are either going to take a lot of time of me looking up trying to figure out where I left off and see if I can just pick it back up. Sometimes I can, especially if I took really good notes of where I left off. I can sometimes just jump into a project from 2 or 3 years ago and pick right back up and it's fine. Other times I can't and I end up getting frustrated, and in that case you just have to rip out and start again. And I'm not sure where these ones are yet because I haven't taken the time to look them up. I just figured out what they were and what pattern I was using and decided that I liked it enough that I'm going to try to stick with it. So the first one is a project about 2 years old. I started this, and actually this project has a lot of a history with me. I started and restarted this project. I think I restarted it multiple times. So I think I've cast on and started from the beginning at least 3 times, maybe even 4 by now, and I keep running into problems. The first time I was having gauge issues, so I ended up having to rip out because it was huge and I needed to take it way, way down again. And so I checked my gauge better, realized I hadn't done a large enough gauge swatch for stranded knitting, which is what this is. You're knitting with 2 different colors at the same time and stranding your knitting. And I hadn't done a large enough gauge swatch, so in the gauge, I got gauge, but then when I was doing it in the round on a full sweater width, my gauge changed and I ended up making it way too big, and so I had to go back and adjust needle size and gauge and all that. So I started over again, and then I don't remember what happened the next time. I think my needle got pulled out and a bunch of stitches fell out, and it was just too much for me to like put it back on, and so I just ripped back to the beginning, started over, and then I don't remember what happened the third time either, but something else happened. I ripped out again. So here we are. In case you can't tell because it's all bunched up on the needle, this is going to be a modified vest, Fair Isle vest. So it's, I say Fair Isle, but it's really stranded knitting, and it's only 2 colors. It just looks like more because I'm using a variegated yarn for the background, and then the foreground color is a black. So I'm using just a plain black fingering weight from Jojo Land. It's their Ballad yarn, which is one of my favorite, like super economical, cheap, but nice quality wool yarns, wool sock yarns. And then the variegated color I'm using is a discontinued color from my shop. I'm thinking about reinventing this color and bringing it back, but I haven't decided yet if I'm going to. If I do, it's going to be dyed in a different style just to enable me to do larger batches and get more consistency of color from skein to skein, because when I first started out dyeing and very first opened my shop, my dye processes were a little different than what I do now, And so I still have a few of my original colorways, like Dragon's Breath is one of my most popular colorways. That was one of the original colors in there. But several of my colors, like Harvest Moon is another one of my oldest colorways that I still sell. But I've adjusted the recipe slightly over the years to make it easier to get consistency between dye lots, as well as to recreate it in larger batches. So I've changed as I've gone, and now I'm in more of a production dyeing mode where I tend to dye large batches and large numbers of skeins in a day. When I first started out, I was dyeing, 1 to 2 skeins per batch, sometimes 3 per batch was like a big deal for me. And I was only doing, a handful of yarn for a couple hours in the evening, whereas now I do full long dyeing days. It's not uncommon for me to do anywhere from 50 to 100 skeins in a day. And, yeah, I'm just needing to do larger batches and make them more consistent for wholesale orders and things like that. So this is called the Witching Hour, and it was a really cool, like dark, edgy, rainbowy skein from my first couple months in business. And some of you guys have been customers for a long time, and so you may have purchased some of the original skeins. I was able to recreate the color pretty close on multiple batches, but it was very time consuming. And it just wasn't efficient, and I really was struggling to get consistency. So for right now, it's a retired colorway. It hasn't been in the shop for over a year, and I'm thinking about bringing it back, but if I do, it's gonna have to be basically revamped from scratch. So yeah, you may see it again in the shop, but it's not gonna happen right now. But I had decided to use that as my background color because I am knitting a vest that looks like stained glass windows. And so I wanted that really nice variegated color in the background to look like the stained glass. And here's a picture of what I am knitting. This beautiful vest right here. The difference is I don't really like vests. If I was going to wear a knitted vest, I never wear vests at all, especially not knitted vests. But if I was going to, I would wear this one because I really do like the V-neck and the style of it. But I really don't wear vests, like ever, I don't think. So my original idea was to knit this vest the way that the pattern calls for, and then I had a little extra of the black yarn because I was planning to add just super, super simple little cap sleeves to make it like a little short sleeve t-shirt style. So that's what I'm thinking about doing. We will see if I end up sticking to that. I may change my mind. Also, like I said, I've restarted this 3 or 4 times, and I still haven't gotten very far. I've never made it past where I'm at right now, so I may not make it all the way through, but I'm really hoping I can this time because I really love it. This pattern is called the Tracery Vest by Kathleen Sperling, and you can find it on Ravelry or in this fabulous, fabulous book, Knitting Wizardry. I'm planning to do a book review of this book coming up. Pardon my copy looking so rough. It's been very, very loved and used for years, and it got some water spilled on it a couple months ago and got all like weird. But I love the patterns in this book, so I think we're gonna do a book review on this in the future, so keep your eye out for that. But I really do like how this pattern is uses the variegated yarn on the background. It's great for using up indie dyed yarns or kettle dyed yarns from some of the bigger yarn companies, and it's great because you get all these colors that look like stained glass, but you only have to use 2 colors. So if you're new to stranded knitting, I would not start with this project. It is it's not like crazy ridiculous hard, but it's not super simple either. There is shaping involved on the sides, which messes with your charts. So that was one of the problems I was having in the many times that I restarted this, was largely because I was having trouble with my charts lining up when I added shaping and tried to stick to my size, plus worry about the charts, plus blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's a little complicated. If it's your first stranded knitting project, I would skip that one and come back to it after you have a couple easier projects under your belt, maybe something like a hat or just a very straight line cardigan with no shaping in it or something like that. But if you've done a couple stranded projects before and you like it, the good thing about it is you can just do the vest without any sleeves or anything, and so that's really nice. You don't have to do any sewing up. It's all knit in the round in one piece, so there's no like sewing up seams or sleeves or anything like that. And it's really, really pretty and really cool, and you don't have to worry about changing colors. So I do like it for that. The other thing that I found in my knitting basket that was good enough, I decided it's worth saving and trying to figure out, is a vintage pattern that I was writing / adapting. So we've talked before on the podcast a little bit about vintage patterns. I know some of you guys have been really interested in old school, like 1920s to 1950s or 60s style vintage patterns and vintage style. And you can't tell today because I'm having a super low-key relaxed day, but I really do enjoy dressing up vintage style and pinup style, doing my hair and wearing fun little 30s and 40s looks. And I love vintage patterns a lot. They're so beautiful, and there's just some phenomenal patterns from back in the day, and you can find a lot of them online now. There are some sites out there that offer free vintage knitting patterns. There's also some where you can purchase them. A lot of Etsy sellers will get old vintage patterns and they'll like scan them in digitally. Some of them will even rewrite them so they're easier to follow for modern audiences and easier to read and have better pictures, and you can buy those digitally and print them off as many times as you want. So there's a lot of great resources out there. So I found years ago, long before I opened Potion Yarns or ever dyed my first skein of yarn, I was really wanting to get into knitting vintage patterns because I loved vintage clothing, and as I was starting to get more obsessed with knitting and I started learning how to knit my own garments from modern patterns, I was really drawn to the old like 1940s and 50s style knits that were so prevalent. And thankfully I got really lucky and I found a couple vintage patterns at my grandma's house that she let me have. And then I started scouring thrift stores, estate sales, garage sales, used bookstores, everywhere I could find, trying to find more vintage patterns. And I came across this stunning little brochure. I don't remember where. I think someone gave it to me because I asked a bunch of my friends if their grandmas had any old knitting patterns, and I think somebody's grandma had this in her basket, and they don't knit at all, so they passed it on to me. The cover is gone, so this was just a little like skinny magazine or simple knitting brochure that had several knitting patterns in it from the late 1940s. So this would have been just after World War II ended, like 1947, 48 probably. And so there's a lot of really fabulous styles in it, like this one. And believe it or not, this one I don't think is knitted. I think it's just her top in this one, but several of them are for, yeah, like this one is a knitted dress. That entire thing is knit on like size 4 needles. So yeah, they were intense about their knitting. Here's another one, knitting dress all the way down, called Luncheon at the Ritz. So I found this absolutely gorgeous little top, and I am obsessed with this top right here. And I just have the one photo, black and white, and then there's some very, very basic knitting instructions. But they're, first of all, vintage sizes are usually only written for one size. This little booklet is actually ahead of its time because most of the patterns were only written for 1, maybe 2 sizes. This one actually is written for 3 sizes, which is really cool, but the sizes vary by like a ½ inch or so, maybe an inch at the most. So like if you fall right in that medium range, you're golden, but if you're smaller or larger busted than that range, you're just out of luck and you got to do the math yourself. So there's that to begin with. The other thing is this was published back in the 40s when there were not very consistent needle sizes and yarn gauge sizes and things like that. Patterns just back then were written very differently. So this pattern came with like very basic instructions, and rather than telling you, you know how modern patterns a lot of times will say like, you know, after you complete the armhole shaping, then you just knit the body for about 8 inches or until it reaches 2 inches less than the desired total length, right? A lot of modern patterns will say something like that. So it goes off of the designer's gauge, which they say is 8 inches. But depending on if your gauge varies or if you want to shorten or lengthen the sweater, they'll also say, or just knit until it's 2 inches less than your desired length, and then you start the ribbing. So I feel like modern patterns are designed more to help people understand what they're doing and why as they're doing it, so you can adjust it a lot more. Back in the 40s and 50s, they didn't really do that so much with patterns, and they don't offer a whole lot of room or instruction for how to adjust it to your own size. So if you're trying not to follow one of these sizes and you need to adjust it, there's not a lot of help for you there. So anyways, all that to say, years ago I started trying to do this with the help of some resources that I've talked about on the podcast before about how to knit your own sweaters or adapt patterns. And so I started knitting this thing, and I got fairly, like maybe about halfway up the front, and then realized this was not going well. I'd put it down for about 6 months and lost my place, and I couldn't figure it out from my little handwritten notes where I was at. So I ripped out to the top of the welted ribbing here this deep hem and I started again. And I got really far and then I stopped, and it's been like 4 years, I think, 3 or 4 years since I worked on it. So now I have no idea where I'm at. But here's the front. I'm using a Malabrigo hand-dyed skein. This is fingering weight, and I'm using size 2 and size 4 needles. And so one of the problems I was having is there's no chart in this. There's absolutely no charts to work off of. And as a knitter, I prefer charts instead of written instructions for things like lace panels or fair isle. So I have this big lace V on the front and no chart. So I was trying to follow their instructions. I found several mistakes in their instructions too, where if you followed it exactly, your V was kind of like wavy and off here and there. So some of the math wasn't great. That's also a hallmark of old vintage patterns. Many of them were not test knit or checked for errors at all. They were just written up quickly, and there were oftentimes errors in them. So I found a bunch of errors and was struggling a lot. So after multiple times of ripping and re-knitting, I finally got it to where it looked really good and I had a pretty steady increase. And then I was having trouble because this is knit flat in pieces, like most vintage knits at the time. And it was a little too much for me to convert it to in the round, plus because of the way the shoulders and the neckline were, I felt like it would be better to do it in pieces and just sew up the side seams. So I got pretty close, and then I was working on the back after I put the front on holders, because the idea is you're increasing for the sleeves on the side. So your body goes like this and then increases for the sleeves, and you get these little like cap dolman sleeves, which is where you don't have like the shaping like a set-in sleeve or a raglan sleeve. It kind of comes off and there's like extra fabric under here. It was a very popular late 40s, early 50s style, and one that I really, really like. So I wanted to keep that original shaping with this look. However, now that it's been a couple years since I pulled it out, I don't know. The bottom lines up okay, but now I'm not sure what I'm doing for the neckline and stuff. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to finish this or not. I'm hoping that with a quiet afternoon and plenty of brain food and a lot of time to look at it, I will figure it out. I did write it down in my notebook. I have pages and pages and pages of notes. And so I'm really hoping I can figure it out and I can just finish it off, because I really love this little blouse. If not though, I do like it enough and I'm determined that this thing is not gonna lick me, that I would consider ripping the entire thing out and starting over and trying to either work out a way to do it in the round or just work out how to do it in pieces. Either way, I may end up having to lose the dolman sleeves, which you can kind of see right here in the picture, how it's like puffing from the extra fabric. I may have to lose that, and I may have to lose the really high neckline and just change that to like a slightly lower, more normal neckline. I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't know how I want to do this. So I have a lot of work ahead of me on that one. I really hope I can get it because it's super pretty and I think I would love wearing it, but it's been a ton of work and it's been years and years and I've never been able to pull it off, so we'll just have to see. So that's what was lurking in the recesses of my knitting basket. I hope that inspires you, that if you have a knitting basket or closet or bag or corner or room or basement or attic or whatever you have that is holding all of your old timeout pieces, the pieces you stuffed because you didn't want to look at them, the ones you forgot about, anything like that. If there's any part of your knitting stash or projects or work in progress or any of that that needs to be cleaned out and organized, I hope this encouraged you to get some spring cleaning in and go organize it, because yes, you will find some scary stuff. You will find some ouches. You will find some, oh my God, I can't believe I bought that. I can't believe I knit that. I never want to look at this. It's okay. You don't have to make a video like I did and show the world. And you'll notice I only showed you the 3 that I kept. I didn't show you all the ones I threw out or ripped out. There might have been a reason for that. So you don't have to show anybody. You don't even have to show the other people living in your house. You can do it when nobody's home, or lock yourself in a room and ask for privacy. And you can just take a trash bag up there, stuff them in, sneak it off to the thrift store and let them deal with it or throw it away, or you can just toss it in the garbage. You know, I don't encourage throwing a lot of stuff into the garbage. If there's any way that you can give it away or sell it or turn it into something else, because I think we should reduce our trash imprint as much as possible. So try to think of some way to reuse it or reduce it or recycle it first before you just throw it away. But hey, sometimes some things just deserve to go straight into the trash can, and I'm not here to tell you that you can't do that. So you don't have to make a big production, you don't have to announce it to anybody or show anybody, but I hope that this will help you feel inspired to clean some of those things out. And you never know, you may find a perfect perfect little spring sweater that just needs to be blocked and have some buttons on it, and then you've got a great new wardrobe piece. So I wish you a lot of fun and a lot of good organizing. I'll send the organizing cleaning fairies to your house for you. Send lots of good wishes for organized knitting baskets and new inspiration for new projects. That's all we have time for today. It is now time to cast off. Love you.